All right, so let's start. Today we're gonna talk about SQL Server. I call this session SQL Server Supercharged, Azure, Fabric, and Copilot in action. So let's try to move on quickly. I just lost my screen. One sec. Here we go. All right. A little bit about myself. My name is Javier Villegas. I work at Mediterranean Shipping Company as an IT director, and I'm Microsoft MVP in the data platform award area. You have my contact information here on the screen and the QR code at the top if you want to reach me out through LinkedIn. Also, you have my email, my X handle, etc. I'm one of the local organizers of our community here in Argentina. So feel free to join us if you speak Spanish. We have our monthly events and we have a lot of fun. So let's start. So, SQL Server is something that today is a platform. It's not what we used to know that was only the SQL Server product that we used to download and install in our bare metal on-premise server. Now, SQL Server is a platform that goes from the cloud, from the ground to the cloud to Fabric. So we have SQL Server family, the product, we still have it. SQL Server 2025 is around the corner, right? It's going to be released hopefully soon. We also have Azure SQL, in where we have the possibility of deploying SQL services on VMs and also as a service, right, with managed instance and Azure SQL database. And finally, SQL database in Fabric. Well, in this conference, we've been talking a lot about Fabric, a lot about Power BI. So, within Fabric, now we have the chance to create an SQL database in Fabric, which, by the way, is still in preview. So the important thing of this concept is that all the layer to use T-SQL code, to have the SQL engine, to have all the tooling, all the copilots is common for all the platform, right? The SQL Server product, Azure SQL, and SQL database in Fabric. If we extend a little bit more this scope, right, we can also say that nowadays SQL runs everywhere. It runs in a Linux OS, it runs in a container, it runs through Azure Arc, on virtual machines, everywhere, right? So that is why Microsoft call it from ground to cloud to Fabric. These are some of the things that I like to highlight in where SQL Server is today, right? The release candidate of SQL Server 2025, where Microsoft just promised that they won't miss the year, so it will be released on this calendar year. The new Azure SQL Hub, which is a new way to organize our Azure SQL resources through the Azure portal. Copilot in SQL, if we have a few minutes, I would like to show you something of what we can do with Copilot in SQL Server, right? Deep integration with Fabric, right? With mainly this concept of mirroring, right? Which allow you to synchronize, replicate, or mirror your operational databases, your transactional tables into Fabric in near real time. Also, recently, Microsoft released Management Studio 21 as general available, and now they just announced the first preview of Management Studio 22. We're going to have a slide later on about this, right? And also, Azure Data Studio has been discontinued, deprecated, so now Microsoft is focusing on Visual Studio Code. So there are several extensions to connect to, with Copilot, to SQL, to Fabric SQL, and to every single SQL component in the family. So let's focus for a bit on SQL Server 2025. So this is the platform that Microsoft calls the AI-ready enterprise database from ground to cloud, right? As in SQL Server 2017, the main star feature was the possibility of run SQL on Linux. This version is basically focusing on AI built in, right? Why do we say AI built in? Well, basically because Now there is a vector data type, a native data type to store embedding within the database. This is great because, with SQL Server 2025, we can reach out through an external model and get the embedding and store it in our database, and then do what we call smart searching, right? Nowadays, we have the possibilities to search within our SQL databases, our tables, just by using the like operator, full text search, right? We know that those are quite limited in terms of what we can do, right? But now with embedding, we can do this smart searching, right? We can also chat with our data. Additionally, there are a bunch of features related to development features, right? JSON native data type, which is actually huge. It's like having a NoSQL database within the SQL database, right? Because we can store JSON document. We have new JSON functions, JSON indexes to speed up the operations, etc., etc. So we're gonna go deep a little bit more on the developers features, and of course the integration with Microsoft Fabric, right? With Fabric SQL database and mirroring, as we just mentioned before. Additionally, Microsoft keep always investing in security, right? There are a bunch of features related to security on it, as well as for mission critical engine. And as we said before, all this organized through the common set of tooling. If we focus a minute on the developer features, which are actually a ton, right? We have this data API builder, which is an external application which helps us to easily create a REST API endpoint to connect to our SQL database, right? So this is not SQL, this is external from SQL Server, but we have it for this release. As I mentioned, JSON data type and JSON functions to manipulate JSON object, and also some enhancement in the T-SQL code to do regular expression. There are also two new interesting features. One of them is change event streaming, which allow us to stream out from the database engine all the changes into an Azure Service Bus. For example, today to handle the changes, we mainly use change data capture, right? Which change event streaming, we can export or send out the events in JSON format into Service Bus, so multiple applications can consume from the Service Bus. And as I mentioned, to connect to AI or large language model, right, we have this new store procedure which allows us to connect to any external REST interface. So, same, always, Microsoft mentioned meats and potatoes, right? Improving concurrency, accelerate performance, and increase in high availability disaster recovery, right? One of the most important features, optimized locking, which actually, what it improves is the way that SQL internally handles the lock escalation. So this way we can accomplish more concurrency on the server. On the performance point of view, there are a lot of enhancements in the intelligent query processing area. And one of the most important features as well is query stored on read-only replicas. This is something that we've been waiting for a while. In the high availability and disaster recovery space, we also have enhancements on how to manage and how to tune and diagnostic availability groups. And there are a lot of enhancements related to the backups, right? There is a new backup algorithm that helps us to compress the files, the backup files, even more. And also, additionally, now we can take the full backups and the transaction log backups directly on the read-only replicas, right? So we can offload everything that is related to the backups to one of the replicas. This is huge because we remove workload from the primary. Let's talk a bit about Azure SQL, the platform, right? There are a bunch of benefits, right? Business continuity and high availability out of the box, right? This is a service that we just go deploy, and in a few clicks, we have business continuity and high availability ready for us. In the backup space, we can automate everything that is related to backup, as well as the retention and also the sheer replication of these backups, right? We know that when we need to take backup, there are certain rules that we have to follow. For example, we need to keep a copy of the backup files on a different location. Well, in Azure SQL, we can do it automatically. Then additionally, and to me, my favorite benefit in Azure SQL is scalability, right? Depending on what we need, if we are in the peak season, if we need additional horsepower to do more processing because our sales are skyrocketing or something, we just go and in a few clicks, we can give more processing power, more memory, faster disk, etc. And eventually, if we need to size down, we can do it in few clicks, right? I do remember many years ago when we had to size the SQL Server, this was a very complex activity, right? Because, you have to predict how the workload is going to be, right? Now, it's still important, but eventually, if you run short, you can scale up super easily, right? All the security of SQL Server plus all the security of the Azure platform, right? And also something quite interesting, which is this concept of versionless. Versionless is that Azure SQL managed instance and Azure SQL database, they have no version number. It's not like 2017, 2019, 2020. No, it's just Azure SQL, right? So does it mean that this is a static product that never changed? No, it's actually the other way around. Microsoft always invests first in Azure SQL, and then later they move those new features into the SQL product that then we download and we store. Of course, the built-in monitoring and the built-in intelligence capability of SQL Server, like query store, intelligent query processing, adaptive query processing, all that is also embedded into Azure SQL, right? It's part of the benefit. Let's switch now for a minute to SQL database in Fabric, right? This is a service that is still in preview, as I mentioned. Hopefully soon it's going to be released as GA. So what Microsoft is trying to do here with SQL databases in Fabric? Well, we know that to set up a SQL database, it requires some knowledge. If you install it on a bare metal or on a virtual machine, there are certain things that you have to follow in terms of best practices, where to locate the files, TempDB, MaxDOP, bunch of things. If you do it on an Azure SQL DB or managed instance, you have to specify the service tier, the region, the amount of cores, if it is provision or serverless, a bunch of things that you have to do. It's not impossible, but you have to have this knowledge. In SQL database, in Fabric, what Microsoft tried to bring to the user is to be simple, right? The only thing we need to do in order to create a database in Fabric is just specify the name, period. Create database name. That's it. And we have a database with nearly the same capabilities that Azure SQL DB, right? Super, super easy and a great service. Autonomous and secure, right? So again, we don't need to spend a lot of time in the administration, even if we have the possibility to, right? And of course, optimize for AI as the whole Fabric platform. So in terms of foundations, right? This is the latest foundations innovation in Microsoft. Remember, I just mentioned Microsoft deprecated Azure Data Studio, that we use it to do assessment and migration from SQL to Azure SQL DB, from SQL 2017 to managed instance, or any kind of assessment and migration. Well, now we can do that with Azure Arc. We have Fabric SQL mirroring, in where most of the SQL components today, we can mirror the data in near real time into Fabric to use that data for analytical purposes. As I mentioned, also Management Studio 22 in public preview, the first one, so you're free to go and download it and start playing around. Visual Studio Code for SQL extension, MCP Server for SQL, right, where we can make SQL Server to talk in this new default protocol with other AR components. And finally, we have Python SQL drivers available for us. So we don't need to use ODBC anymore to connect to SQL. If we use Python, we can do it with native drivers. Uh, the final overview of the integration with Fabric. We know Fabric with the data factory for ingestion, the real-time intelligence, the data warehouse, the lakehouse, and Power BI, as we saw today all day. Also, we have one lake, which is the storage layer of Microsoft Fabric. Well, as you can see in the lower part of the screen, we have SQL Server, and Azure SQL and Azure SQL. So we have 4 components. SQL Server 2025, as you can see, the SQL icon is a little bit different. Then we have SQL, which is from 16 to 2022, right? Then we have Azure SQL DB and Managed Instance. For Azure SQL DB and Managed Instance, mirroring is general available, right? So you can go use it today and you have support. For all the SQL version 2016 to 2022, which use a different technique to do the mirroring than 2025, right, is still in preview. Hopefully, by the end of the year, we're going to have this in GA. Finally, Management Studio 2022, a lot of enhancement over there. The most important ones, I will say, is that now it's going to support Windows ARM 64, right? So we're going to be able to run it natively on an ARM processor. It's going to have a JSON viewer, right? I just mentioned that JSON now is a native data type. So we have a viewer, and also there is more integration with dark mode and, few more things coming. For the extension in Visual Studio Code, there are a bunch of things like GitHub integration, schema compare, query plan visualizers, local containers, and Fabric integration. If we go talk a little bit about Copilot, which, Microsoft is pushing hard into Copilot, right? I would like also to mention a brief of what we can do with Copilot nowadays. Through the Azure portal or through Management Studio 21 and in the future 22, we have the possibility to interact with SQL, with any of the SQL that we just mentioned, right, through Copilot using natural language, right? And we have 2 sets of skills. One of them targeted to database administrators, and the other one target to developers and end users. The one target to database administrators will allow us to go and check, for example, ask SQL Server why my database is low, or do I have a missing index, or when was the last time that I ran a backup, right? Do I need to do update statistic? Why my CPU is high? And Copilot will analyze based on my current session on SQL and will return all this information, right? Again, this is a modern way to interact with SQL Server. So that's the skill for administrators, right? Then we have the skill for developers, right? The skill for developers is quite interesting because basically, let's say that if you receive a database, you start a brand new shop, and you have to do and analyze your database, meaning your tables, your relationships, your foreign keys, the key columns, etc., to understand and do this reverse engineering for you to start writing your T-SQL code and get actual data. It's going to take some time and effort, right? With Copilot, now you can go and ask in natural language, right, questions about your sales databases. Which are the sales from the last semester? Which are the top 3 products that were sold in the last month? Do I have a stock for this specific product? Which were the top 5 vendors in the last year? Can you compare sales from this year versus the sales from the previous year? All these questions, if we need to start writing T-SQL code, it's a little bit complex, right? I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's a little bit complex, right? But now we can do it interacting with SQL. So let's see it in action in quickly what we can do with Copilot. So here I have my Management Studio 21, right? As you can see here at the top, I have the Copilot button, right? I'm connecting to SQL Server 2025 running on a virtual machine, right? So here I have to specify the session, right? I will say I'm connected to this session to the AdventureWorks database, and I will ask, for example, when was the last time I took a backup? Right? Again, this is the DBA skill, right? It's gonna analyze, right, and it will return when was the last time that my database was backed up. So let me see if I can do something here really quick to zoom it. This is a brand new VM, so sorry about that. I know that we have just a few seconds left. So you see, we have that, for my database, the backup date was this one specifically, and it was a full backup. Do I have missing indexes? It will do the analysis through the database engine and will look for missing indexes. As you can see, there are several recommendations for missing indexes. This is because I was running some workload before, right? So I'm connected to my AdventureWorks database, and here what I have is actually some questions that I can ask to Copilot. I will go, let me just put it in here so I can run it properly. And I will start chatting with my data. So I will go and say, calculate the average vacations hour per shop title, right? This will require me to know in which tables we have data related to, HR, vacation hours, etc., and build the SQL query, right? Now, what we have here is, the output of what we were asking for. So analyze our average vacation hour. So we have every single shop title and the average vacation hour. If we continue here, we can keep chatting the whole day. Calculate the current pay rate. And as you can see, at no point I didn't open the database to check the tables or the relationships or anything. I'm just chatting with that, right? So here I have the pay rate. I can continue talking to it year over year sales analysis. It's going to give me the sales year per year without me doing any T-SQL code, right? Right? We have year per year, all the total sales. I can move on and say, select employees whose pay rate is 50 or more. Something important to mention here is that if my connection, if my credential has read write to just few tables, Copilot also had the same permissions, right? It's not like because I'm using Copilot, I will be able to do more things than my credentials allow. No, it's with my current session, with my rights, this is what I'm able to see from Copilot. And finally, I will do select minimum, average, and maximum pay rate for my database. All right. So I know there is a sales database. I can keep asking questions all day. It's like chatting with my data. All right. So go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So this was the last slide, I just went through a very, very brief description of what SQL is today and what we can do with Copilot. Again, you have my contact information here. If you have any question, please reach out to me and we can continue the conversation offline. So I'm done with the presentation, Jacek.